One of the most important things we have to figure out right away with our gardens is where our garden is going to be and how we're going to arrange it. I'm going to assume that you don't have a garden spot right now, and in this video, I'll walk you through the process of picking out a hunk of garden real estate. Now, even if you do have a garden spot already, there are some guidelines that I think will be helpful to you as well. The guidelines here will give you room to grow your vegetables, plus these plans also build in room for you to be able to work on your gardens, which is something that oftentimes is forgotten when we're all focused on the different vegetables that we want to grow. There are lots of things to consider when planning a garden, and I want your garden to be successful. So here are the things I think you should be thinking about. Now, first off, let's remember that we all have different areas available for our gardens. So you'll undoubtedly need to customize these guidelines to fit the space you have available. You should be able to take this advice and apply it to your unique situation. And don't worry, use what makes sense, adapt what you can, and honestly, ignore what you can't use or what might be too much of a pain in the you-know-where. Let's start by thinking about where the sun is throughout the day and which way is south. During the summer months, the sun comes directly overhead, but the sun gets much lower in the sky during the winter months, right? Pick an area where you'll get plenty of sun during the times of year associated with the vegetables you want to grow. For example, choose a spot for cool weather crops like lettuce that gets a lot of sun when the sun is lower in the sky, but maybe not as much sun when the weather gets hot. My covered greenhouse is a great example of this. It gets a lot of sun during the day when the sun is lower in the sky, but it gets less sun in the heat of the summer because it's up against my house, and my house blocks the sun until about noontime. Next, think about how big you want your garden to be and how big the walking paths in and around your garden are going to be. I want to encourage you to plan for walking paths in your garden. This may seem like a waste of good garden space, but hear me out on this. One of the things I've found most important is to try to avoid walking where you grow your vegetables. When you walk in your garden, you squash or compact the soil. And if you keep the garden soil as loose as possible, that gives your plants, particularly their roots, a lot of space to grow into. So a big part of my garden planning revolves around not stepping into my garden. So these plans include walking paths, which double as working paths. Ideally, I'm suggesting that you have walking paths between areas where you grow plants. I usually plan for paths that are at least 16 to 18 inches wide. This gives me enough room to maneuver around, to weed, kneel, and most importantly, to harvest. Now, if you have plenty of space, and that's not a concern, you might want to think about having 3-foot wide paths so that you can bring a wheelbarrow up and down your paths. You'll see I have both types of paths in my garden, and after you work on your garden for a while, you'll thank me for this later. Now, let's get to our garden area. If you think about how far you can comfortably reach when you're standing up, it's probably about 2.5, maybe 3 feet, right? So if the garden area we have in mind is going to be up against a fence, a house, or some other structure that we can't get around the back to and you can only access it from one side, I would recommend that you plan on about a 3-foot wide garden bed, tops, to make sure that you can comfortably reach everything without having to step into your garden soil. However, if your garden area is wide enough and you have access from both sides, you could make your garden bed 4 feet or maybe even 5 feet wide, although I found that 4 feet works best for me. Now, as an example of what I do, I have a 7-foot by 12-foot gardening area. And because I use this garden as a greenhouse during the winter months, I've planned it as if I only have access from a single center pathway. So I designed this garden with the gardening area in the shape of a U with a central 18-inch wide walking path right down the middle. I have 2 33-inch wide gardening areas on either side and a 33-inch area at the end of the U. I can easily reach everything from the center pathway, and the only problem I have with this design is that it's too narrow for me to get a wheelbarrow in. So when I add compost, I have to carry everything in using a 5-gallon bucket. Next, you should be thinking about protecting your garden from larger animals in your area. You may be fortunate where you are, but I have to worry about deer, woodchucks, rabbits, squirrels, and chipmunks. I have a fenced-in area where I grow most of my vegetables, so that keeps the deer and adult rabbits out, but I did find a baby rabbit in my fenced-in area once. Now, woodchucks are problematic because they can dig their way under the fence, And if they get in, they can decimate your garden in a day or so. Now you can combat woodchucks by planting some sacrificial vegetables near where they come into your yard, and they usually stop to eat what you provided, and they won't bother your garden. Now squirrels aren't usually too much of a problem unless you're growing sunflowers, but I found that chipmunks can get through just about anything, even chicken wire, so there really isn't much you can do to keep them out, aside from catching them in a have-a-heart trap and removing them from the area. Now figure out what makes the most sense for your garden. I found that thinking about this stuff ahead of time is really important, and it helped me a lot.